locked train compartment, a woman missing, and a single whisper that stops the detective cold. As Jonathan opens the rusted door, he doesn't just find a clue, he finds her. But why now? And what secret brought her back into his life? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The rain fell in relentless sheets across Philadelphia on that autumn evening of 1895, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of dark reflection. Detective Jonathan Pierce stood beneath the iron awning of the Pennsylvania Railroad station, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the wet platform. At 32 years of age, he had earned a reputation as one of the city's most dedicated investigators, a man whose piercing gray eyes seemed capable of unraveling the most tangled mysteries. His dark overcoat hung heavily on his broad shoulders, soaked through despite his best efforts to remain dry. The telegram had arrived at his office 3 hours earlier, its words brief but urgent. Train delayed. Passenger missing. Your presence required immediately. Station Master Williams. Jonathan had grabbed his leather satchel, secured his revolver in its holster, and made his way through the storm-darkened streets to the grand station that served as Philadelphia's gateway to the wider world. The station's interior was a cathedral of iron and glass, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows far above. Gas lamps flickered along the platforms, casting pools of amber light that barely pushed back the encroaching darkness. The usual bustle of travelers had diminished to a trickle, most sensible folk having sought shelter from the tempest that raged outside. Station Master Williams emerged from his office, a portly man with graying whiskers and worry etched deep into the lines of his face. Detective Pierce, thank heavens you've arrived. We have a most unusual situation. Jonathan removed his hat, water dripping from its brim onto the polished floor. Your telegram mentioned a missing passenger. Tell me everything. Williams led him down the platform, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The evening train from New York arrived 40 minutes late due to the storm. During the journey, one of the passengers, a young woman, simply vanished from her compartment. The conductor discovered her absence when he went to collect tickets for the final check before arrival. Vanished? Jonathan's voice carried a note of skepticism. People don't simply disappear from moving trains, Mr. Williams. Nevertheless, that appears to be precisely what happened. The station master stopped before a passenger car that sat isolated on a side track, its windows dark and unwelcoming. The compartment was locked from the inside. Her belongings remain undisturbed, but the lady herself has vanished without a trace. Jonathan studied the train car with the analytical gaze that had served him so well in his profession. The vehicle was one of the newer Pullman designs, elegant in its appointments, with polished wood panels and brass fixtures that gleamed even in the dim light. Rain drummed steadily on its roof, creating a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. Has anyone entered the compartment since the discovery? Only the conductor and myself to verify her absence. We've touched nothing else. Good. I'll need to speak with the conductor and any passengers who might have occupied adjacent compartments. Jonathan moved toward the train car's entrance, his hand resting on the rusted door handle. The metal was cold and rough beneath his fingers, corroded by years of exposure to the elements and countless journeys through rain and snow. As he pulled the door open with a protesting squeal of hinges, a voice emerged from the shadows of the platform behind them. It was soft, tremulous, colored by tears and desperation. Jonathan Pierce? He turned sharply, his heart suddenly racing in a way that had nothing to do with the investigation. The voice had stirred something deep within his memory, an echo from a past he had tried to leave behind. Through the curtain of rain, a figure emerged into the lamplight. She was beautiful in a way that transcended the disheveled state of her appearance. Her dark hair, once carefully arranged, now fell in damp tendrils around a face of classical elegance. Her traveling dress of deep blue velvet was soaked and muddy, clinging to a slender figure that trembled with cold and emotion. But it was her eyes that captured him, those remarkable green eyes that he had last seen 7 years ago, on the day she had left Philadelphia forever. Eleanor? His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Eleanor Whitmore? She stepped forward, and he could see tears streaming down her pale cheeks, mixing with the rain that had soaked her through. Her gloved hands clutched a small leather valise, her knuckles white with the intensity of her grip. I hoped they would send you. I prayed for it, though I had no right to pray for anything after what happened between us. The station master looked between them with obvious confusion. "You know this woman, detective?" Jonathan couldn't tear his gaze away from Eleanor's face. 7 years had passed since their last meeting. 7 years since the misunderstanding that had torn them apart, sending her to New York to live with her aunt while he had thrown himself into his work with the single-minded determination of a man trying to forget. She had been 20 then, a young woman just beginning to bloom into the stunning beauty she had now become. He had been 25, a newly appointed detective, too proud and too wounded to fight for what they had shared. "Yes," he said finally, his voice rough with emotions he thought he had long since buried. "I know her. Eleanor, what are you doing here? What's happened?" She took another step closer, and he could see her fighting to maintain her composure. "My cousin, Iris. She was traveling with me from New York. We shared a compartment on the train. Jonathan, she's disappeared, and I'm terrified that something terrible has happened to her." The station master interjected. "Then this is your missing passenger, detective." Miss Eleanor Whitmore was the other occupant of the locked compartment. Jonathan's mind raced, professional instinct warring with the tumult of emotions that Eleanor's unexpected presence had stirred. "Tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning, and leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." Eleanor drew a shaky breath, visibly struggling to organize her thoughts. "Iris and I boarded the train in New York this morning. She's my cousin on my mother's side, Caroline Blackwood's daughter. She's 23 with golden hair and blue eyes. She was wearing a traveling suit of gray wool with black trim." She paused, her eyes distant as she recalled the events. "The journey was pleasant at first. We spoke of Philadelphia, of her hopes to visit the museums and gardens. She had never been to the city before. Around 3 o'clock, we had tea in the dining car. Iris seemed cheerful, excited about the trip. "Go on," Jonathan encouraged gently, noting how her hands trembled. "We returned to our compartment around 4. The storm was beginning then, and Iris said she felt a headache coming on. She asked if I would mind if she rested for a while. I told her of course not, and I settled in to read the novel I had brought. She lay down on her berth and closed her eyes." Eleanor's voice grew more strained. "I must have dozed off myself. The rocking of the train, the sound of the rain, it was all so soothing. When I woke it was nearly dark outside. I looked over to check on Iris and—" Her voice broke and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Jonathan took a step closer, instinctively wanting to comfort her, though propriety held him back. "What did you see, Eleanor?" "Nothing. She was simply gone. The berth was empty, her traveling cloak still hanging on the hook, her handbag sitting on the seat where she had left it. But Iris had vanished. I searched the compartment frantically, though there was nowhere she could have hidden. I tried the door, but it was still locked from the inside, just as we had secured it for privacy. I called for the conductor, and he unlocked it from the corridor. But by then, she had been gone for who knows how long." Station Master Williams cleared his throat. "The conductor confirms this account. The door was indeed locked from the interior when he arrived. He had to use his master key to gain entry." Jonathan's analytical mind began organizing the facts, searching for logical explanations, even as part of him remained acutely aware of Eleanor's proximity, of the familiar scent of her perfume that even the rain couldn't entirely wash away. "Was there anything unusual about your cousin's behavior? Did she seem worried or frightened about anything?" Eleanor wiped at her tears with a handkerchief she produced from her sleeve. "Not that I noticed. She was perhaps a bit quieter than usual during tea, but I attributed that to fatigue from the journey. She had traveled from Boston to New York the previous day to meet me, so she had been on trains for quite some time." "Did she mention anyone she might have planned to meet in Philadelphia? Any friends or acquaintances?" "No. She was to stay with me at the Belmont Hotel. We had reservations for a week. This was meant to be a holiday, a chance for us to grow closer." "We had not seen each other since we were children." Eleanor's voice cracked again. "Jonathan, please, you must find her. She's all alone in this city, if indeed she's still in the city at all. I cannot bear to think of what might have befallen her." The desperation in her voice moved him deeply. Whatever had passed between them years ago, whatever pain and pride had driven them apart, none of that mattered in this moment. A young woman was missing under mysterious circumstances, and Eleanor needed his help. "I will find her," he said with quiet conviction. "I give you my word, Eleanor, but I must examine the compartment thoroughly, and I'll need you to come with me. There may be details you've overlooked, things that will make more sense to you than to me." She nodded, relief evident in her expression, despite the fear that still shadowed her eyes. Of course. Anything that might help. Jonathan turned to the station master. Mr. Williams, I'll need you to ensure that no one else boards this train car. Post a man if you must. And I'll require a detailed list of all passengers who were aboard, particularly those in compartments adjacent to the ladies. I'll see to it immediately, Detective. As Williams hurried away, Jonathan offered his arm to Eleanor. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, and he felt the slight tremor that ran through her. Together, they approached the train car, and Jonathan pulled open the rusted door once more, its metallic screech cutting through the steady drum of rain. The interior corridor was narrow and dimly lit by a single gas lamp that had been left burning. Their footsteps were muffled by the carpet runner that extended the length of the car. Eleanor led him to the third compartment on the right side, its door standing open to reveal a small but elegantly appointed space. The compartment contained 2 berths that could be folded down from the walls, currently in their upright positions. 2 upholstered seats faced each other beside the window, which was curtained in heavy velvet. A small table folded down between them, and brass fixtures gleamed in the lamplight. Everything appeared neat and orderly, giving no indication of struggle or disturbance. Jonathan entered carefully, his trained eye sweeping across every surface, every shadow. Eleanor's handbag sat on one seat, along with a novel whose spine was still crisp with newness. On the opposite seat rested another handbag, presumably belonging to the missing Iris, and a folded newspaper. "Show me exactly where everything was when you woke," Jonathan instructed gently. Eleanor stepped inside, pointing to each item in turn. "My book and bag were here, just as they are now. Iris's handbag was there. Her cloak hung on that hook." She indicated an empty brass hook near the door. "It was here when I fell asleep, but when I woke and found her gone, I discovered it on the floor." Jonathan examined the cloak, a well-made garment of charcoal wool with a silk lining. He checked the pockets carefully, finding them empty save for a crumpled receipt from a New York bookshop. He turned his attention to Iris's handbag, opening it with Eleanor's permission. Inside, he found the usual items a lady might carry: a coin purse containing several dollars, a handkerchief embroidered with the initial I, a small mirror, and a folded letter. He opened the letter carefully, noting that it was dated 3 weeks prior and addressed to Miss Iris Blackwood in Boston. The letter was written in an elegant flowing script that spoke of education and refinement. Jonathan read it aloud, his deep voice steady in the confined space of the compartment. "My dearest Iris, I hope this letter finds you well and in good spirits. I write to you with news that I believe will bring you great joy. The matter we discussed during your last visit has been resolved in the most favorable manner possible. The documents have been located, and they confirm everything we hoped. I urge you to come to Philadelphia at your earliest convenience. There is much we must discuss, and it would be best done in person rather than through correspondence. The Belmont Hotel will have rooms reserved under your name from the 20th of October onward. Please send word of your arrival date. Your devoted friend, Margaret Sinclair." Eleanor's eyes widened with recognition. "Margaret Sinclair? I know that name. She's a prominent philanthropist in Philadelphia, involved with several charitable organizations. But Iris never mentioned knowing her. In fact, she told me this was her first visit to the city." Jonathan carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in the handbag. Yet this letter suggests a prior relationship, and one of some significance. What matter were they discussing? What documents? He turned to face Eleanor, noting the confusion and concern that played across her delicate features. "Did your cousin ever speak of any family mysteries or legal matters that needed resolution?" Eleanor shook her head slowly, a strand of damp hair falling across her cheek. "No, nothing of the sort. Our correspondence has always been cordial, but not particularly intimate. When she wrote to suggest this visit, I was actually surprised. We had not been close as children, and I thought perhaps she wished to remedy that distance between us. Or perhaps she had another purpose entirely." Jonathan mused, his detective's instinct telling him that this case was far more complex than a simple disappearance. He moved to examine the window, testing its latch. It was secure, and the window itself was closed tightly against the storm. There was no way someone could have exited through it while the train was in motion. He knelt to examine the floor, running his fingers along the carpet's edge. The compartment was remarkably clean, with no signs of struggle or disturbance. It was as if Iris Blackwood had simply ceased to exist. leaving behind all her worldly possessions, but taking nothing with her. Eleanor watched him work, her arms wrapped around herself, as if to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Jonathan, there's something else I should tell you. Something I noticed, but didn't think important at the time." He rose to his feet, giving her his full attention. "Everything is important in an investigation like this. Please tell me." She moved to the window, pulling back the velvet curtain to reveal the rain-streaked glass. "When we boarded the train in New York, I had the distinct impression that someone was watching us. A man in a dark suit stood on the platform, and his eyes seemed to follow Iris specifically. I mentioned it to her, but she laughed it off, saying I was being fanciful. But Jonathan, now I wonder if my instinct was correct. Can you describe this man?" Eleanor closed her eyes, clearly struggling to recall details. He was of average height, perhaps 40 years of age, clean-shaven, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore a well-tailored suit and carried a walking stick with what appeared to be a silver handle. There was something about his expression, an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Jonathan withdrew a small notebook from his coat pocket and began making notes. "Did you see him board the train?" "I don't know. Once we were in our compartment, I didn't venture into the corridor until we went to the dining car for tea. And even then, I wasn't looking for him specifically." "The dining car," Jonathan said thoughtfully. "Did anything unusual happen there? Anyone who paid particular attention to you or your cousin?" Eleanor turned from the window, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "There was a gentleman who nodded to us as we entered. He was dining alone, reading a newspaper. Distinguished-looking, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He seemed familiar somehow, though I couldn't place where I might have seen him before." "Did he speak to you?" "No, but I noticed him watching us several times during our meal. Not in an improper way, but as if he recognized us, or at least recognized Iris. She didn't seem to notice him at all. She was too busy admiring the countryside through the window and talking about her plans for our visit." Jonathan made additional notes, his mind working through possibilities and connections. "I'll need to interview all the passengers, but I'm particularly interested in this gentleman from the dining car and the man you saw on the platform in New York. It's possible they're connected to your cousin's disappearance." He moved to examine the door mechanism, noting the heavy lock that could indeed only be secured from the inside. The conductor's master key would have been required to open it from the corridor. "Eleanor, think carefully. When you fell asleep, you're certain the door was locked?" "Absolutely certain. Iris locked it herself after we returned from tea. She said she wanted to ensure our privacy while she rested." "And the window was closed?" "Yes. We had closed it earlier when the rain began. The compartment was quite warm and stuffy when I woke, which is partly why I dozed off in the first place." Jonathan stood in the center of the small space, turning slowly to take in every angle, every possible explanation. The facts as presented seemed impossible, yet here they stood in an empty compartment that should have contained a missing woman. There had to be a logical explanation, something they were overlooking. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the compartment entrance. Station Master Williams had returned, accompanied by a thin, nervous-looking man in the dark blue uniform of a railroad conductor. "Detective Pierce, this is Thomas Reeves, the conductor who discovered Miss Blackwood's absence." Jonathan gestured for them to enter, though the compartment was becoming crowded. "Mr. Reeves, please tell me exactly what you observed and when." The conductor twisted his cap in his hands, clearly distressed by the unusual circumstances. "I was making my final round before our arrival in Philadelphia, sir. It was standard procedure to check all compartments and ensure passengers were preparing to disembark. When I reached this compartment, I knocked as usual. Miss Whitmore answered immediately, and I could see at once that she was greatly distressed." "What time was this?" "Approximately 6:30 in the evening, sir. We were about 20 minutes from the station." "And you're certain the door was locked from the inside?" "Yes, sir. I heard the lock turn before Miss Whitmore opened the door. She was frantically asking if I had seen her cousin, saying she had vanished from the compartment. I thought perhaps the young lady had simply gone to the washroom or another car, but Miss Whitmore insisted we check immediately." Eleanor spoke up, her voice strained. "I had already searched the entire car before calling for the conductor. Iris was nowhere to be found." Reeves nodded vigorously. "That's correct, sir. I conducted a thorough search of all the cars myself, with Miss Whitmore accompanying me. We looked in every compartment, every washroom, even the baggage areas. There was no sign of Miss Blackwood anywhere on the train." Jonathan felt Eleanor's hand suddenly grip his arm, her fingers tight with anxiety. "Then where could she have gone?" A woman cannot simply vanish into thin air, especially from a locked room on a moving train. He covered her hand with his own, a gesture of comfort that felt both natural and startlingly intimate after so many years apart. I don't believe in impossible disappearances, Eleanor. There's always an explanation, no matter how well concealed. We simply need to find it. Turning back to the conductor, he continued his questioning. Mr. Reeves, during your rounds earlier in the journey, did you observe anything unusual? Anyone entering or leaving this compartment? No, sir. The last time I saw both ladies was when they returned from the dining car around 4 o'clock. I was at my station in the corridor, and they passed me going to their compartment. Miss Blackwood smiled and wished me a good afternoon. That was the last time I saw her. And you remained at your station in the corridor? For the most part, yes, sir. I did make 2 rounds through the cars, once at 4:30, and again at 5:15. But I never saw Miss Blackwood leave this compartment. Jonathan's mind raced with possibilities. Is there any way someone could have exited the train while it was in motion? Emergency doors, perhaps, or windows large enough to permit passage. Reeves looked horrified at the suggestion. The emergency doors are locked from the inside and would require deliberate effort to open, and the windows in these compartments are far too small for an adult to pass through. Besides, sir, with the storm and the speed we were traveling, attempting to leave the train in such a manner would be suicidal. Nevertheless, I need to examine all possibilities. Jonathan released Eleanor's hand reluctantly and addressed the station master. Mr. Williams, I'll need a complete list of every stop this train made between New York and Philadelphia, even brief ones. There were only 2 scheduled stops, Detective, one in Newark for 10 minutes and another in Trenton for 15 minutes. However, due to the storm, we also made an unscheduled stop outside of Princeton. There was debris on the tracks that needed to be cleared. Eleanor gasped softly. I remember that stop. It woke me from my doze. The train lurched as we slowed, and I heard men's voices outside. But Iris was already gone by then. When I looked at my watch, it was nearly 6 o'clock. Jonathan seized on this new information. How long did this unscheduled stop last? Williams consulted a pocket watch he produced from his vest. According to the engineer's log, approximately 20 minutes. The crew had to remove a fallen tree branch from the tracks. 20 minutes, Jonathan repeated thoughtfully. Long enough for someone to leave the train, if they were determined to do so. Mr. Reeves, did you or any other crew member see passengers disembarking during this stop? No, sir. The crew was all forward, dealing with the obstruction, and with the storm, passengers were instructed to remain in their compartments. It was quite dark by then, and the rain was falling heavily. Jonathan turned to Eleanor, noting the pallor of her skin and the way she swayed slightly on her feet. The strain of the day's events was clearly taking its toll. Eleanor, is there anything else you can remember about that stop? Any sounds? Any movements? She pressed her fingertips to her temples, thinking hard. I heard the rain, of course, and the voices of the crew. There was a bang, like a door closing, but I assumed it was part of the work being done on the tracks. And then, she paused, her eyes widening. There was another sound now that I think about it. A whistle, very faint, as if someone was signaling. It was a specific pattern, 3 short notes followed by 2 long ones. A signal, Jonathan said, his pulse quickening with the thrill of a potential breakthrough. Someone communicating with someone else, perhaps arranging a rendezvous. Station Master Williams interjected, Detective, if I may suggest, there's a small station house near where that stop occurred. It's rarely used. More of a maintenance depot than a proper station. But if someone wanted to leave the train discreetly and be picked up, that would be an ideal location. Jonathan's mind was already formulating a plan. I need to visit that location immediately. Mr. Williams, can you arrange for transportation? And I'll need the exact coordinates where the train stopped. Certainly, Detective. I can have a coach and driver ready within the hour. Make it so. Jonathan turned to Eleanor, concern evident in his features despite his professional demeanor. You should return to your hotel and rest. This has been an ordeal for you, and there's nothing more you can do tonight. But Eleanor shook her head with determination, her chin lifting in a gesture he remembered well from their past. It was the same stubborn resolve she had shown when insisting on attending lectures at the university, despite her family's objections, the same spirit that had first drawn him to her all those years ago. No, Jonathan, I'm coming with you. Iris is my responsibility, and I won't sit idle in a hotel room while she's missing and possibly in danger. Whatever has happened to her, I need to be part of finding the truth. He wanted to argue, to insist that she remain safe and warm while he pursued this investigation through the storm-ravaged night. But he could see in her eyes that argument would be futile. Eleanor Whitmore had always been a woman of strong will, and that quality had not diminished in their years apart. "Very well," he conceded, "but you'll follow my instructions precisely. If there's any danger, you'll remain in the coach while I investigate." "Agreed," she said, though something in her tone suggested she would make her own decisions when the moment came. The coach that station master Williams provided was a sturdy enclosed carriage drawn by 2 strong horses, their coats steaming in the cold rain. The driver, a grizzled man named Samuel who had worked for the railroad for 30 years, knew every mile of track between Philadelphia and New York. He helped Eleanor into the coach with practiced courtesy, while Jonathan gave him detailed instructions about their destination. Inside the coach, Eleanor and Jonathan sat across from each other, the leather seats creaking with the vehicle's movement as they departed the station. A small oil lamp swung from a hook overhead, casting shifting shadows across their faces. The rain continued its relentless assault on the coach's roof, and the wind howled around them like a living thing. For several minutes they rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Jonathan found himself acutely aware of Eleanor's presence, of the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair, of the graceful line of her neck as she gazed out the rain-streaked window. 7 years had passed, yet sitting here with her felt both utterly foreign and achingly familiar. It was Eleanor who finally broke the silence. "You've done well for yourself, Jonathan. Station Master Williams spoke highly of your reputation. They say you're the best detective in Philadelphia." He met her gaze, seeing something in her expression that might have been pride mixed with melancholy. "I had little else to occupy my time or thoughts. Work became my refuge, as music became mine," she replied softly. "I teach piano in New York, at a conservatory for young ladies. It's fulfilling work, though not quite the concert career I once dreamed of." "I remember your playing," Jonathan said, memories flooding back unbidden. "You had such passion, such talent. I used to sit in your parlor and listen to you practice, completely mesmerized." A sad smile touched her lips. "Those seem like someone else's memories now, from another lifetime entirely. So much has changed since then." "Eleanor," he began, then hesitated, unsure how to navigate the treacherous waters of their shared past. "What happened between us, that final day before you left for New York? I've thought about it countless times over the years, wondering if I could have said something different, done something to prevent you from leaving." She turned from the window to face him fully, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes once more. "Jonathan, you didn't prevent me from leaving because I never wanted to leave in the first place. That's what I've wanted to tell you for 7 years, but pride and hurt kept the words locked inside me." His heart constricted painfully. "Then why did you go? Your letter said you couldn't marry me, that our differences were too great, that your family would never approve of a young detective with no fortune or prospects." "That letter," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wrote that letter, Jonathan. I swear to you on everything I hold dear, those were not my words." The coach lurched over a rough patch of road, throwing them momentarily off balance. Jonathan steadied himself, his mind reeling from her revelation. "What are you saying? If you didn't write it, then who did?" "My father," she said, the words heavy with old pain and anger. "I didn't discover the truth until 2 years ago when he fell ill, and in his fever confessed what he had done. He had intercepted the letter I actually wrote to you, the one in which I begged you to wait for me, to give me time to convince my family that our love was worth fighting for. He destroyed it and forged a replacement in my handwriting. He was always skilled with a pen, and he knew my hand well enough to replicate it." Jonathan felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. But why? Why would he do such a thing? "Because he had already arranged a match for me with the son of his business partner, a young man of wealth and social standing. When I refused to even meet this suitor, when I told him I loved you and intended to marry you regardless of his approval, he took matters into his own hands. He sent me away to New York to stay with my Aunt Dorothy, telling me you had read my letter and never wished to see me again, and he told you through that forged letter that I had rejected you." The revelation struck Jonathan like a physical blow. 7 years of believing Eleanor had abandoned him, 7 years of burying his heart in work to avoid the pain of her loss, and all of it based on a lie. "Did you marry the man your father chose?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I refused every suitor he presented, and eventually he gave up trying to control my life. When he died last year, he left me a small inheritance, enough to maintain my independence. But Jonathan, by then so much time had passed. I thought you had surely moved on, perhaps married someone else. I had no right to return to Philadelphia and disrupt your life with revelations about the past. I never married, he said quietly. There was never anyone else, Eleanor. There couldn't be, because my heart remained with you, even when I thought you had rejected it. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and this time Jonathan couldn't maintain the distance between them. He moved to sit beside her, pulling her gently into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his chest as sobs shook her slender frame. He held her close, one hand stroking her hair, feeling 7 years of loneliness and misunderstanding finally beginning to dissolve. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against his coat. "I should have fought harder, should have found a way to reach you despite my father's interference. Instead, I let pride and hurt silence me, and we lost so many years that could have been ours. We were both victims of a cruel deception," Jonathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "But Eleanor, we're here now, together. Perhaps fate has given us a second chance, even under these troubling circumstances." She pulled back slightly to look up at him, her green eyes luminous with tears and hope. "Do you think we could truly start again? After all this time, after all the pain?" He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I know that what I felt for you 7 years ago never died. It merely waited, dormant but not extinguished. And seeing you tonight, hearing your voice, holding you like this, I realize that I never stopped loving you, Eleanor. I never could, nor I you." She breathed. "Jonathan, I've loved you through every day of these 7 years, through every lonely night and empty morning. You've been the ghost that haunted my dreams and the ache in my heart that never eased." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but she met him halfway. Their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid this moment might shatter like glass. But then passion overtook caution, and the kiss deepened. 7 years of longing and lost time pouring into that single perfect moment of reconnection. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens with this investigation, whatever we discover about your cousin's disappearance, I won't lose you again. I can't." "You won't," Eleanor promised. "I'll fight this time, Jonathan. I'll fight for us with everything I have." The coach began to slow, and Samuel's voice called down from the driver's seat. "We're approaching the location, Detective Pierce. The tracks should be just beyond that stand of trees." Reluctantly, Jonathan released Eleanor and moved back to his seat, though he kept hold of her hand. He peered out the window into the rain-lashed darkness. Through the sheets of water, he could barely make out the dark shapes of trees and the lighter line of the railroad tracks cutting through the wilderness. The coach came to a complete stop, and Samuel climbed down to open the door. "It's treacherous out here, sir. The ground is muddy and there's precious little light. Are you certain you want to investigate tonight?" "I must," Jonathan replied, retrieving a large oil lantern from beneath the seat. "A woman's life may depend on what we discover here." He turned to Eleanor. "Please remain in the coach where it's dry and safe." But Eleanor was already gathering her skirts, preparing to descend. "I told you, Jonathan. I'm coming with you. Iris is my cousin, and I need to see this through." Knowing argument was futile, Jonathan helped her down from the coach, holding her steady as her boots sank into the thick mud. Samuel handed down 2 additional lanterns, and the 3 of them made their way toward the tracks, the rain soaking them within moments despite their coats. The location where the train had stopped was marked by fresh gouges in the earth where the crew had dragged the fallen branch clear of the tracks. Jonathan's lantern revealed deep wheel ruts and numerous footprints, though most had been washed away by the rain. He moved slowly, methodically, searching for any clue that might indicate Iris Blackwood had passed this way. Eleanor stayed close to his side, her own lantern held high. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to something glinting in the mud near the tracks. "What's that?" Jonathan crouched down, careful not to disturb the object before examining it. It was a silver brooch in the shape of a rose, delicate and clearly expensive. He picked it up carefully, wiping away the mud to reveal an inscription on the back. "To Iris, with love, M.S." "Margaret Sinclair," Eleanor breathed. "The woman who wrote the letter we found in Iris's handbag. Jonathan, this must have belonged to Iris. She was wearing it when we boarded the train in New York. I remember admiring it and her telling me it was a gift from a dear friend. Jonathan examined the brooch more closely in the lantern light. If she dropped it here, or if it was torn from her clothing, then she definitely left the train at this location. But was it voluntary, or was she taken against her will? They continued searching, moving away from the tracks toward the small station house that Williams had mentioned. It was a dilapidated structure, barely more than a shed, with boarded windows and a door hanging loose on its hinges. Jonathan approached cautiously, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. The door creaked open at his touch, revealing an interior thick with dust and shadows. But as he swept his lantern across the space, he saw fresh footprints in the dust, multiple sets leading to and from the door. Someone had been here recently, perhaps within the last few hours. "Stay behind me," he instructed Eleanor, then stepped inside. The station house was empty save for a few broken chairs and an old ticket counter. But on the counter lay something that made Jonathan's blood run cold. A woman's gray traveling glove, and next to it, a folded piece of paper weighted down by a stone. He picked up the paper with trembling fingers and unfolded it. The message was brief and written in the same elegant script as the letter from Margaret Sinclair. "Detective Pierce, if you are reading this, then you have proven yourself worthy of the truth. Miss Iris Blackwood came to Philadelphia seeking answers about her true parentage. What she discovered put her in grave danger from those who wish to keep the past buried. She is safe for now, under my protection. But there are forces at work that threaten both her life and her future. Come alone to the Sinclair Mansion on Rittenhouse Square tomorrow at noon. Bring Miss Eleanor Whitmore with you. The answers you seek, and the reunion Miss Whitmore desires, await you there. Trust no one else with this information. Margaret Sinclair." Eleanor read the note over his shoulder, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "Her true parentage? What can that mean?" "Iris is the daughter of my Aunt Caroline and her late husband Robert Blackwood. There's no mystery about her birth." "Or so you've been led to believe," Jonathan said grimly. "But this note suggests otherwise. Margaret Sinclair knows something. Something important enough that people are willing to harm Iris to keep it secret." The rain had finally ceased by the time their coach approached Rittenhouse Square the following day. The morning sun broke through dissipating clouds, casting golden light across Philadelphia's most elegant neighborhood. Stately mansions lined the square, their brick facades and wrought iron fences speaking of old money and established power. Jonathan and Eleanor sat side by side in the coach, their hands intertwined, both silent as they contemplated what awaited them at the Sinclair Mansion. Eleanor had spent the night at the Belmont Hotel, though Jonathan doubted she had slept any more than he had. When he had collected her that morning, he had found her dressed in a gown of deep emerald that complemented her eyes, her hair arranged in an elegant style that spoke of careful preparation. She was nervous. He could see it in the tension of her shoulders and the way her fingers worried at the brooch she wore at her collar. But there was also determination in the set of her jaw. "Whatever we discover in there," Jonathan said quietly as the coach slowed before an imposing 3-story mansion of red brick and white marble, "we face it together. You're not alone in this anymore, Eleanor." She squeezed his hand gratefully. "I know. Having you beside me makes all the difference. 7 years ago, I faced my trials alone, because I believed I had to. Never again." The mansion's entrance was flanked by marble columns and accessed by a curved stairway of white stone. A butler in formal livery answered Jonathan's knock, his expression carefully neutral as he examined their calling cards. "Detective Pierce and Miss Whitmore, you are expected. Please follow me." They were led through a grand entrance hall where oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors gazed down from paneled walls. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors as they passed through corridors decorated with fine furniture and expensive tapestries. Finally, they were shown into a spacious drawing room where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a garden still glistening with rain. A woman rose from a velvet settee to greet them. She was perhaps 50 years of age, handsome rather than beautiful, with silver-streaked dark hair arranged in a severe style. Her dress was of black silk, suggesting mourning, and her bearing spoke of breeding and education. But it was her eyes that captured Jonathan's attention, warm brown eyes that held both intelligence and deep compassion. "Detective Pierce, Miss Whitmore, thank you for coming. I am Margaret Sinclair." Her voice was cultured, with the refined accent of Philadelphia's elite. "Please sit down. I have much to tell you, and some of it will be difficult to hear." Before they could respond, a door at the far end of the drawing room opened, and a young woman entered. She was indeed beautiful, with golden hair arranged in soft curls and blue eyes that widened with recognition and relief as she saw Eleanor. "Eleanor!" Iris Blackwood rushed forward, her gray traveling dress the same one she had worn on the train. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm so sorry for the worry I've caused you. Please forgive me." Eleanor stood quickly, embracing her cousin with evident relief. "Iris, thank God you're safe. I've been frantic with worry. What happened? Why did you leave the train in such a mysterious manner?" Iris pulled back, tears streaming down her face. "I had to. When the train made that unscheduled stop, I received a signal, the whistle you must have heard. It was Mrs. Sinclair's driver letting me know it was time. I had only moments to act. I climbed out the window on the opposite side of the compartment, the one facing away from the platform side of the train. It was terrifying, dropping down into the darkness and rain, but the driver was there to catch me. We ran to a waiting carriage and came directly here." "But why such secrecy?" Jonathan interjected, his detective's mind already working through the implications. "Why not simply tell Miss Whitmore your intentions?" Margaret Sinclair gestured for everyone to sit, and once they were settled, she began her explanation. Her voice was steady, but Jonathan could hear the emotion beneath her controlled exterior. "Because there are people in this city who would have prevented Iris from reaching me, people with power and influence who have spent 23 years maintaining a lie. Detective Pierce, Miss Whitmore, what I'm about to tell you will shock you, but every word is the absolute truth, supported by legal documents and sworn testimony." She paused, her gaze fixing on Iris with unmistakable maternal affection. "Iris Blackwood is not the daughter of Caroline and Robert Blackwood. She is my daughter, born out of wedlock 23 years ago when I was young and unmarried. Her father was Thomas Sinclair, the man who later became my husband, though we were not yet married when Iris was conceived." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Iris reached out to take her cousin's other hand, her expression pleading for understanding. Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. "I was 27 years old, independent and headstrong, engaged in charity work among Philadelphia's poor. Thomas was a physician who volunteered at the same charitable hospital where I worked. We fell deeply in love, but my family considered him unsuitable. He had no fortune, no social standing, only his medical degree and his dedication to helping those in need. When they discovered I was with child, they were horrified by the scandal." She rose and moved to the window, looking out at the garden as if the beauty there could soften the painful memories. "My brother, Eleanor's father, Edward Whitmore, took control of the situation. He arranged for me to go away to a private sanatorium where wealthy families sent their unmarried daughters to give birth in secret. I was kept there for 6 months, and when my daughter was born, Edward told me she had died during delivery. I was grief-stricken, broken by the loss. They brought me home and told everyone I had been traveling in Europe." Jonathan felt Eleanor's hand tighten in his as she absorbed this revelation about her father's cruelty. Margaret turned back to face them, and tears now flowed freely down her refined features. "But my daughter hadn't died. Edward had arranged for his wife's sister Caroline and her husband Robert, who were childless and desperate for a baby, to take Iris as their own. They moved to Boston shortly after, far enough away that the deception could be maintained. Everyone was told that Caroline had been pregnant and had given birth in Boston. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Edward, Caroline, Robert, and the physician Edward paid handsomely to falsify birth records." "My father did this?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, filled with horror and disbelief. "He stole a child from her mother and built an entire life on that lie. He believed he was protecting the family's reputation," Margaret said, though her tone carried no forgiveness. "He thought he was saving me from scandal and giving Iris a respectable life with 2 parents. But he was wrong. He destroyed years that I should have had with my daughter, and he condemned me to a grief that nearly killed me." Iris spoke up, her voice trembling but determined. 3 months ago, my mother, the woman I knew as my mother, Caroline, fell gravely ill. On what she believed was her deathbed, she confessed the truth to me. She told me about Margaret, about the deception, about everything. She begged my forgiveness and urged me to seek out my true mother. She gave me letters, documents, everything I needed to prove the truth. Caroline recovered from that illness," Margaret added, "but her conscience could no longer bear the weight of the lie. She wrote to me, explained everything, and asked if I would welcome Iris into my life. I wept for days when I learned my daughter was alive, that I had a chance to know her after all these lost years. Jonathan's analytical mind was piecing together the fuller picture. But someone discovered what was happening. Someone who had a vested interest in keeping the truth buried. Who, Mrs. Sinclair? Who threatened Iris? Margaret's expression hardened with anger. Philip Morrison, a prominent banker and one of this city's most powerful men. He was the physician Edward paid to falsify the birth records all those years ago. Young then, ambitious, willing to compromise his ethics for money. He used that money to establish himself, to build his banking empire. But he knew that if the truth came out, if his role in the deception was revealed, his reputation would be destroyed. He would face criminal charges, lose everything he had built. When Morrison learned through his connections that Iris was coming to Philadelphia to meet with me, he panicked. He hired men to watch her, to prevent her from reaching me if possible. That's why we had to arrange the secretive departure from the train. We couldn't risk Morrison's men following us directly to this house. Eleanor stood abruptly, her face flushed with righteous anger. This is monstrous. My father, this Morrison, they destroyed lives to protect their own interests. Jonathan, surely there must be legal recourse. These documents Iris mentioned, can they not be used to expose the truth and bring Morrison to justice? They can and they will, Jonathan said firmly, rising to stand beside her. Mrs. Sinclair, I'll need to see all documentation. With proper evidence, I can arrest Morrison and bring charges against him. The statute of limitations on fraud of this magnitude has not expired, especially given the ongoing nature of the deception. Margaret moved to an elegant writing desk and withdrew a leather portfolio. Everything is here. Birth records, both the false ones Morrison created and the genuine ones from the sanatorium. Caroline's written confession, letters between Edward and Morrison discussing payment, and my own sworn statement detailing everything that happened 23 years ago. As Jonathan examined the documents, his experienced eye quickly confirmed their authenticity and their damning nature. This is more than sufficient. I'll take these to the district attorney this afternoon. Morrison will be arrested before nightfall. But there's more, Iris said, her voice urgent. Morrison wasn't working alone in recent weeks. He hired a man named Vincent Drake to watch me, to intimidate me if necessary. Drake followed me from Boston to New York, and he was on the train yesterday. He's dangerous, Detective Pierce. Mrs. Sinclair's driver saw him at the unscheduled stop, searching the area after I had already escaped with the carriage. He knows I'm somewhere in Philadelphia, and he won't stop looking. Jonathan's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. Then we need to act quickly. Mrs. Sinclair, is there a way I can leave this house without being observed? If Drake or Morrison's other men are watching, they might try to prevent me from reaching the authorities. There's a service entrance through the garden, Margaret replied. It leads to an alley that connects to the next street over. My driver can take you in an unmarked carriage. No one would suspect it. Good, I'll go immediately. He turned to Eleanor, cupping her face gently in his hands. Stay here with Iris and Mrs. Sinclair. You'll be safe inside this house. I'll return as soon as Morrison is in custody. But before he could move toward the door, the sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful atmosphere of the drawing room. A large stone crashed through one of the tall windows, wrapped in paper that fell loose as it skidded across the floor. Jonathan moved instantly to shield the women, his revolver drawn as he scanned for threats. Through the broken window, he could see a man standing in the garden, a man matching the description Eleanor had given of the figure who had watched them at the New York station. Dark suit, dark hair graying at the temples, a silver-handled walking stick. But now that walking stick was revealed as a weapon, its handle twisted to reveal a blade. Vincent Drake, Margaret whispered, her face pale with fear. The man's voice carried clearly through the broken window, cultured but cold. Mrs. Sinclair, send out the girl and the detective. Mr. Morrison is most anxious to have a conversation with them. If you cooperate, no one else need be harmed. If you refuse, well, I have men positioned all around this property, and we will take by force what you won't surrender willingly. Jonathan's mind raced through possibilities. They were trapped, outnumbered, with civilians to protect. But surrender was not an option, not when it would mean delivering Iris and the evidence into Morrison's hands. He needed a plan, and he needed it immediately. Mrs. Sinclair, he said quietly, never taking his eyes from Drake, does this house have a secure room, somewhere with a solid door and no windows? The wine cellar, stone walls, iron door, accessible through the kitchen. Take Eleanor and Iris there now. Lock yourselves in and don't open that door for anyone but me. Go." As the women hurried from the room, Jonathan moved to a position beside the broken window where he had a clear line of sight, but was partially shielded by the wall. "Drake, I'm Detective Jonathan Pierce of the Philadelphia Police. You and your employer are already facing serious charges. Don't make this worse by adding assault and kidnapping to your crimes." Drake laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Noble words, Detective, but you're outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Mr. Morrison is a very powerful man with considerable resources. Do you really think you can stand against him?" "I don't stand alone," Jonathan replied. "The law stands with me, and justice will prevail regardless of Morrison's wealth or influence." "Then I'm afraid we're at an impasse. And impasses, Detective, must be broken one way or another." What happened next occurred with shocking suddenness. Drake raised his hand in a signal, and 3 men emerged from various positions around the garden, all armed with pistols. At the same moment, Jonathan heard the front door of the mansion crash inward, followed by shouts and the sound of running feet in the corridor. He was trapped between 2 forces, and the women he had sworn to protect were somewhere in the depths of the house. Jonathan made his decision in an instant. He couldn't fight his way through Morrison's men, but he could buy time, could create enough chaos and confusion to give the authorities a chance to arrive if someone could summon them. He fired a shot through the broken window, deliberately high to avoid hitting Drake, but close enough to make him dive for cover. Then he ran for the drawing room door, slamming it shut and wedging a heavy chair beneath the handle. It wouldn't hold long, but it might give him the seconds he needed. Racing through the mansion's corridors, following the route the women had taken, he reached the kitchen just as Morrison's men broke through the drawing room door behind him. The kitchen was spacious and well-appointed, with modern appliances and a large iron stove still warm from the morning's breakfast preparations. At the far end, a narrow door stood open, revealing stone steps leading down into darkness. Jonathan plunged down the stairs, pulling the door shut behind him and throwing the bolt. He could hear Iris's frightened voice calling out from the darkness below, and Eleanor's steadier tones trying to calm her. Using matches from his pocket, he found an oil lamp hanging from a hook and lit it, flooding the wine cellar with warm light. The cellar was exactly as Margaret had described: stone walls, no windows, and the only entrance the door he had just secured. Rows of wine bottles lined the walls, and barrels stood in neat arrangements. Eleanor, Iris, and Margaret huddled together in the center of the space, their faces pale but resolute. "Jonathan, what's happening up there?" Eleanor asked, moving to his side. "Morrison's men have breached the house. We're secure for the moment, but we need help. Mrs. Sinclair, is there any other way out of this cellar?" Margaret shook her head. "None. This room was designed to be completely secure, to protect valuable wines from theft. That's why I suggested it." Above them, they could hear muffled shouts and the sound of furniture being overturned as Morrison's men searched the house. It was only a matter of time before they found the cellar door. Jonathan examined the iron barrier, noting its substantial construction. It would take considerable effort to break through, but determined men with the right tools could manage it eventually. "We need to summon the police," Jonathan said, thinking aloud. "If we could somehow signal someone outside Morrison's perimeter." "The servants' tunnel," Iris said suddenly. "Mrs. Sinclair, you told me about it yesterday. The old tunnel that the original owners built for servants to move between the house and the carriage house without being seen from the street. Does it connect to this cellar?" Margaret's eyes widened with hope. "Yes, I had forgotten about it. It's been sealed for years, but the entrance is behind those barrels in the corner. If we could open it, the tunnel leads to the carriage house, and from there you could reach the street and summon help." Working together, they quickly moved the heavy barrels aside, revealing a low wooden door set into the stone wall. The door was swollen with age and damp, but Jonathan's strength was equal to the task. With a groan of protest, the door finally gave way, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. "I'll go," Jonathan said immediately. "The rest of you stay here and keep that cellar door secured." But Eleanor grabbed his arm, her grip fierce. "No, we go together. I won't be separated from you again, Jonathan. Not after we've only just found our way back to each other." He started to argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. This was the woman he loved, the woman who had survived 7 years of separation and loneliness, who had fought her way through deception and heartbreak to reach this moment. He had no right to ask her to remain behind while he faced danger alone. "Together, then," he agreed, squeezing her hand. "But we move quickly and quietly. "Mrs. Sinclair, Iris, bar this entrance behind us and don't open it unless you hear my voice." The tunnel was cramped and damp, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Jonathan led the way, holding the oil lamp high while Eleanor kept close behind him, her hand in his. The walls were brick, green with moss and age, and water dripped constantly from the ceiling. It felt like descending into some ancient catacomb, cut off from the world above. They had traversed perhaps 50 yards when they heard it, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the tunnel behind them, followed by angry shouts. Morrison's men had broken through the cellar door and discovered their escape route. The pursuit had begun. "Run!" Jonathan urged, and they fled through the darkness, the lamp swinging wildly and casting maddened shadows on the walls. Behind them they could hear their pursuers entering the tunnel, multiple voices calling to each other as they gave chase. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching on and on into blackness. Eleanor stumbled once on the uneven floor, but Jonathan caught her, pulling her upright without slowing their desperate pace. His lungs burned with exertion, and his heart pounded not with fear for himself, but with terror for Eleanor's safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was likely only a few minutes, they saw light ahead. The tunnel's exit loomed before them, a wooden door similar to the one they had entered through. Jonathan threw himself against it, and it burst open with a crash, spilling them both into the relative brightness of the carriage house. The structure was old but well maintained, with stalls for horses and several fine carriages arranged in neat rows. But most importantly, the large doors that opened onto the street stood unlocked. They ran for those doors, emerging onto a quiet side street lined with elegant townhouses. "Help!" Jonathan shouted at the top of his lungs. "Police! We need the police!" A gentleman walking his dog stopped in surprise, and a woman peering from a nearby window let out a startled cry. But more importantly, Jonathan saw a familiar sight, a police officer on his regular beat, turning the corner just 2 blocks away. "Officer!" Jonathan called, waving his badge in the air. "Detective Jonathan Pierce! I need immediate assistance!" The officer, recognizing both the badge and Jonathan's face, began running toward them. Behind them, Vincent Drake and 2 of his men burst from the carriage house, their weapons drawn. But seeing the police officer approaching and aware that they were now on a public street with witnesses, they hesitated. That hesitation was their downfall. Within minutes, more police arrived in response to the officer's whistle, summoned from nearby posts. Drake and his men were surrounded, disarmed, and placed under arrest. Jonathan quickly explained the situation to the ranking sergeant, a man he had worked with on several previous cases. "Get men to the Sinclair mansion immediately," Jonathan ordered. "There are more of Morrison's hired criminals inside, and 2 women in the wine cellar who need protection. And send your fastest rider to arrest Philip Morrison at his bank. The charges are fraud, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. I have all the evidence we need." As the police dispersed to carry out these orders, Jonathan finally allowed himself to draw a full breath. Eleanor stood beside him, her dress torn and muddy from their flight through the tunnel, her hair coming loose from its pins, but to him she had never looked more beautiful. The morning sun caught in her dark hair, and her green eyes shone with relief and triumph. "It's over," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "After 23 years of lies and pain, the truth finally comes to light." "Thanks to Iris's courage and your support," Jonathan replied, pulling her close. "And thanks to a mother's love that refused to accept loss even when all hope seemed gone." They returned to the Sinclair mansion in a police carriage, arriving to find Margaret and Iris being helped up from the wine cellar by officers who had secured the premises. All of Morrison's men had been arrested, and word had just arrived that Philip Morrison himself was in custody, taken from his office at the bank where he had been desperately trying to destroy incriminating documents. In the days that followed, the scandal rocked Philadelphia society. The newspapers were filled with stories of the deception, the stolen child, the powerful banker who had built his fortune on fraud and intimidation. Public opinion turned sharply against Morrison, and sympathy flowed toward Margaret Sinclair and her daughter Iris. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence and testimony from Caroline Blackwood, who had traveled from Boston specifically to testify, Morrison was convicted on multiple charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and stripped of his wealth and social standing. Vincent Drake and his accomplices received similar sentences for their roles in the conspiracy and the attack on the Sinclair mansion. For Margaret and Iris, The verdict brought not only justice, but the beginning of a new relationship. They spent hours together each day, making up for lost time, learning about each other, building the bond that should have existed from Iris's birth. Margaret established a trust for her daughter, ensuring her financial security. But more importantly, she gave Iris something money couldn't buy: a mother's unconditional love and acceptance. Eleanor remained in Philadelphia throughout the trial, her own relationship with Jonathan deepening with each passing day. They spent their evenings walking through the city parks, attending concerts and theater performances, talking endlessly about their past, their present, and the future they would build together. One crisp autumn evening, 6 weeks after the night they had reunited, Jonathan brought Eleanor back to Rittenhouse Square. The trees were ablaze with fall colors, and the last rays of sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. He led her to a bench overlooking the square's central fountain, the same bench where, 7 years earlier, he had planned to propose before her father's deception had torn them apart. "Eleanor," he began, taking both her hands in his, "7 years ago, I lost you because I didn't fight hard enough, because I allowed pride and hurt to silence me. I've regretted that weakness every day since, but fate has given us a second chance, and I won't make the same mistake twice." He withdrew a small velvet box from his coat pocket and opened it to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold set with a single emerald that matched her eyes perfectly. "I love you, Eleanor Whitmore. I've loved you through 7 years of separation, through heartbreak and loneliness, and I will love you for all the years yet to come. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love to you?" Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but these were tears of joy, pure and uncomplicated. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jonathan. 1,000 times yes. I love you with all my heart, and I want nothing more than to be your wife." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness of a love that had survived deception, time, and heartbreak to emerge stronger than ever. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling through their tears. They were married 3 months later in a ceremony at Christ Church, with Iris serving as Eleanor's bridesmaid, and Margaret Sinclair sitting in the place of honor usually reserved for the bride's parents. It was a small wedding, intimate and joyful, attended only by those who truly mattered to them. As Jonathan and Eleanor exchanged their vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the days of their lives, Iris whispered to her mother, "Do you think I'll ever find a love like theirs?" Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled. "I believe you will, my darling. After all, if there's one thing we've learned, it's that truth and love will always find a way, no matter how many obstacles stand in their path." And in the years that followed, that prediction proved true. Iris did find love, and Eleanor and Jonathan built a life filled with happiness, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of having fought for and won the future they deserved. The detective who had opened that rusted train door on a rainy Philadelphia night had found not only a mystery to solve, but the love he thought he had lost forever, and the woman who had whispered his name through her tears had found her way home at last.